Greetings folks, and welcome to the Electromaker show. This is your roundup of all things maker and embedded and lovely. And as you can see, we are not shooting this one in the attic of dreams. I have my rather glamorous background right here because we are on the road, but that's not going to stop us because we have a lot of exciting things to get through. Not least the fact that the Raspberry Pi 5 now has a 16GB variant. It came out recently and is recommended retail price is $120. Who is it for? Why would you want to get one of those when you can spend just a little bit more and get a mini PC? Well, everyone has opinions and you're going to hear mine. As well as this, we also have our Red Pitaya EduPack giveaway. We'll be announcing the winner and also talking about the fantastic video Robin made about it. This is something you will have found out about if you follow our YouTube channel or follow our social media. It's the biggest giveaway we've ever done and we did it over the Christmas period. So of course I wasn't here, so we didn't talk about it on the show until now. We'll also be talking about the ESP32 C61, which is a variant on the ESP32 C6. Devkits have just become available for it, and it's a really interesting chip. It's a bit of a downgrade in some ways from the C6, but it has pseudo-RAM, which is something that the C6 didn't have. So we'll be talking about that, among many other things. So let's get on with this week's show. So we're going to open the show by talking about the new Raspberry Pi 5 variant, the 16GB variant. Now, like most things I've talked about with Raspberry Pi over the past few months, because they've had an absolute run of putting out a whole host of new products and accessories, we all knew that most of these things were coming. It was just a question of when. And all of them, because it's Raspberry Pi, have a huge amount of people talking about them with a huge amount of differing opinions. And the first thing many people said when they said, oh, the Raspberry Pi 5 16GB came out was $120, seems to be straying quite far from this idea of the $35 credit card size single board computer that's cheap and that can do most of the things you want it to, but isn't a fully fledged desktop computer that can replace your workstation. And there have been many people who have said, I tried using a Raspberry Pi as a desktop for a week. I was one of those people. I wrote about it years ago. But really, who is the Raspberry Pi 5 16GB variant for? Well, my initial reaction to that is it's quite simple. There's two groups of people that jump to mind immediately. The first is people who just want to have the top flight Raspberry Pi. Someone who isn't necessarily buying a huge amount of them to do lots and lots of things with, but it's their main hobby device. And if they want it to be their main hobby device, they're going to get the better one that they can. Because for $120, you still get a absolutely incredible fully fledged single board computer with the best support out there in this region of computing, as it were. So that's a very obvious use case. But am I going to get one of these things? Probably not. And that's because so far I have a Raspberry Pi 5 with 8GB of RAM, and everything I've used it for so far hasn't even come close to pushing up against that 16GB usage needs, because again, I'm not trying to replace my desktop computer or my laptop with it, so I don't really ever have that many situations where my Raspberry Pi 5 has, say, 1 million Chromium tabs open or something along those lines. But there is another use case for it, which I think is far more appropriate to a higher gigabyte variant of the Raspberry Pi 5. Well, put simply, the second group of people who are interested in the Raspberry Pi 5 16GB variant are going to be people who are running large language models and other AI tasks on the Pi. Because yes, you can get AI accelerators that will run separately, the Google TensorFlow, Google Coral AI accelerator can plug in via USB and add USB capabilities. There's also a variety of different M2 slotted ones that can now work with the FPC connector on the Raspberry Pi 5. But you're always going to run up against a single problem, which is that AI, especially large language models, require a large amount of RAM. Now, AI is something that everyone has an opinion on, some positive, some negative. I am very much on the fence about whether I think I need a local large language model, because it would be a huge amount of fun to play with, wouldn't it? To have your own personal assistant that is designed to work the way that you want it to, and you don't necessarily have to trust that the services that you're a lot of the time paying to use their large language models are going to be able to give you the service that you want, or give you the unbiased service that you expect. Because there are large language models out there, as we know, that are by nature unbiased because of the people that have designed them, or at least commissioned them. One thing that is interesting about this is that the new version, the new variant of the Broadcom chip that they have, which has the D0 stepping on it, is actually what made this possible. I didn't realize this until just on the release of the Raspberry Pi 5 16GB variant, but the new chip wasn't actually able to support 8GB of RAM on release. I just thought it was an interesting point, because as well as the perceived speed increases and cost savings that the D0 stepping gives, yeah, that's the reason that we're getting a 16GB Pi 5 now. These things sort of had to happen in order. Now, as always, rather than trust me to give you the real details of what's going on here, I'm going to pass that on to someone else. Whenever we talk about Raspberry Pi, it's very difficult not to talk about Jeff Geeling in the same sentence, because as always, he had the scoop on this and has been doing extended tests on the Raspberry Pi 5 16GB variant for a while. He has a video up on his YouTube channel, which I'm sure you're already aware of. I am also a massive fan of Jeff's blog, and in fact, I find myself going to that more than the YouTube videos just because, yeah, life, many things, children. Yeah, I don't get to watch videos that often outside of the context of recording this show. So I read his blog a lot more than the videos, although I did watch the video as well, both of which give a great deep dive into the new Pi 5 16GB variant. I also wanted to quickly mention in passing that Raspberry Pi announced in the same blog post as their 16GB variant that they're going to be using enhanced rock weathering going forward as a way of carbon capture, which is something I find absolutely fascinating. Now, I know that there are opinions about climate change out there, which I find hilarious because it's proven 100%. But anyway, there are still opinions about whether people should do it, who should be talking about it. But from a technical perspective, enhanced rock weathering is one of my favorite ideas behind the ways we can capture carbon. Because essentially you take a silicate rock, and I think the Raspberry Pi people are using basalt as theirs, and you crush it up really, really small, and then you spread it across farmland. Because the Earth can actually suck in a certain amount of carbon and take it out of the atmosphere. It's been doing that naturally for a long time. But if you actually use certain silicates, it can up the amount of carbon it pulls out of the atmosphere tenfold. And not only that, this crushed rock spread over the agricultural farmland actually does good. I don't know the exact figures on it, but the crop yields on farmland where this has been tested are higher than where there isn't actually this crushed rock silicate. It's almost like it becomes part of the soil and gives it, I don't know, better density. I'm not a soil scientist, but I have written about different forms of carbon capture and climate change going forward in the past, so I find this really, really interesting. And the other thing that I just think is quite nice is that Raspberry Pi are doing this in a way that I find sensible. When it comes to climate change and what we do about it, I'm quite pragmatic. I love the idea that you can pay money to say, hey, we're going to plant 10,000 trees over the next year, and it's going to take such an amount of carbon out of the atmosphere. That's a lot of moving parts to actually get to a point where it does anything. Whereas you can crush up some rock, put it over some farmland, that will actually start doing something the moment you do it. And you can't take away carbon that you've already spent, but you can make arrears into what you're going to be doing in the future if you're a big company like Raspberry Pi. And I love the way they are doing it. I'd be very interested to hear what all of you think about that, of course. Now we're going to move on to talk about Embedded World, because we at Electromaker have been going to Embedded World for quite some time. It is an amazing conference that doesn't just show off the bleeding edge of technology, it also is just a very wide representation of where the industry is. Whether you are an engineer or a maker, you're likely to find things there that you'll be able to see in person and get your head around and speak to the people who are creating it in a way that you just can't really achieve through a web browser. And for the next few shows, Embedded World are going to sponsor a few sections in the show so we can talk about different aspects of the trade show. But for today, I just wanted to start by saying, if you're not familiar with it, a high-level overview is Embedded World is in the conference center in Nuremberg, in Germany. There is also Embedded World conferences happening in the USA and in China, and they all follow a fairly similar footprint, which is just huge halls full of vendors showing their stuff off, either by just having it there so you can get it up into your hands and hold it and speak to the people who have created it and will be able to tell you about it, or by having actual demos that work on the floor. And some of these demos are absolutely incredible. Some of them are showing the tech that you are using in situ. So, for example, people who make automotive parts, it's not unusual to find an entire car that's been set up to show how these pieces work inside the car. So we're going to go into a lot more detail in the coming weeks about it, but if you are someone who is interested, whether you're an engineer or a maker, it's definitely worth taking a quick look at the Embedded World website, because there you can find insights to all of the different things that have happened in the conference over the years and previews for what will be happening in this particular conference too. One other just slight side fact that is just worth mentioning is that if you were ever planning to come to a conference in Europe, one of the nice side effects of Embedded World being in Nuremberg is that you are in Nuremberg. It is an absolutely beautiful historic city, so if you were planning on having a trip that would be mixing work and play, as it were, Nuremberg is wonderful for that too. But for now, I suggest you take a look at the Embedded World website. That will show you everything you need to know about the upcoming conference, and if you search Embedded World on the Electromaker blog, you will find a huge amount of different interviews and features we've done from the conference floor, giving you a flavour of what it is like being there. Because I cannot stress enough, I've been to many conferences now, and there's something specific about getting to the Messe in Nuremberg and going into just this incredible mixture of different everything that is at first quite overwhelming and then just incredible. You can't turn a corner without seeing something absolutely fascinating. So if you are interested in finding out more, please do head to the links in the description, and thank you Embedded World for sponsoring this section of the show. This year's Embedded World Conference takes place on the 11th to the 13th of March 2025 in Nuremberg, although as I've previously mentioned there are conferences in America and China as well. If you'd like to find out more about it, head to the link in the description below. Moving on, we're going to briefly talk about the new ESP32 C61. So it was announced a while ago, and I kind of held off talking about it then because there wasn't really enough details for me to go into it and do it any justice. But now there are dev kits available, and the ESP32 C61 is a variant of the ESP32 C6, something that we talked about recently on the show a few times. It's the more home automation variant of the ESP32 line, designed to work with things like Zigbee and Thread and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, of course. Now, as always, there's a fantastic CNX software article about this, and if you want to get the full breakdown of the differences between the two of them, you can head there. But from my eyes, it's a really interesting choice for a chip, but by the same token, Espressif makes such a huge, wide variety of chips for different use cases, there's going to always be that choice. Because in short, it is clocked slower, it has less onboard flash, it has less onboard RAM, but this is the first ESP32 C6 board, or the first ESP32 RISC-V board that I know of that has pseudo RAM. So you get 2 megabytes of pseudo RAM, but you get less analog to digital converters, for example. And also one of the things I've noticed in the comparison chart is that this particular board is not Thread certified. And in fact, the Bluetooth version on the ESP32 C61 is only Bluetooth 5.0, whereas if I remember correctly, the Bluetooth version on the C6 is 5.3 or something along those lines, which probably adds up to a few of the differences we're seeing. Now, the question is, as always, who is this particular development board for? I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably not me and probably not you, because this is a very specific thing, isn't it? Why would you need a slightly slower clock speed? Well, if you don't need the full run of clock speed and you're using it for a very specific example, maybe you're putting it into a product, maybe that's something that could save you a little bit in battery. Why would you want to have less flash and RAM on board? Well, maybe you don't need that much flash and RAM on board, but certain parts of what you were doing would require to actually have a space where you could use more RAM. Well, that's where the pseudo RAM comes in. I can see this being used in a very specific point in the industry, although I can't really bring my mind to exactly what that might be. I'd be very interested to hear from you in the audience, having read the CNX software article, where you think these things could actually show up. Because the C6 in general is a very exciting chip. I've just started messing around with Thread and Matter. I say just started because, as you can see, I'm no longer in the Attic of Dreams. The day before we traveled, I was messing around a little bit finally with the 2 ESP32 C6 dev kits that arrived, just a little bit too late to do anything with it on the show, unfortunately. But yes, if you are someone who's already working with the C6 or just this kind of chip in general, do take a look at the article and let me know what you think. As far as I can understand it, there's no actual versions of the ESP32 C61 dev kit available, so I can't do a price comparison as yet, but of course I will come back to it when there are. Now, we have talked about Red Pitaya several times here on the Electromaker show, and with good reason. They are the Swiss Army knife for engineers, that's how they describe themselves, and that seems a very accurate description, because essentially what you have is an FPGA talking to an analog front end and able to send and receive signals at an incredibly high speed. But what makes it fantastic is that this is also attached to a Linux system on chip. It's actually all in one die, but it's nice to think of them separately. And that Linux system on chip allows you to access the Red Pitaya from the browser and just say what it can be. And you literally can do that. You can set up the Red Pitaya, go to the browser and click oscilloscope. It is an oscilloscope. Or logic analyzer, and it will be a logic analyzer. Or a software-defined radio. Or a signal generator. All of these things are all now in one small box. And the EduPack is something that allows you to attach a huge amount of different probes and things to it to allow it to, well, it kind of becomes your workshop. Now, Robin is the one that had hands-on work with it. And if you'd like to find out more about it, you can head to the Electromaker Educator video that is linked in the description here. But hopefully you've been keeping an eye on our YouTube channel and our social media, because we've been talking about this over Christmas when we did our giveaway. Over the holiday period, Red Pitaya decided to work with us to do the biggest giveaway we've ever done on the Electromaker YouTube channel and the Electromaker website, and they gave us one of their EduPacks, which is up to $600 worth of things that you can do with the Red Pitaya. So not only is the STEMlab 12514 EduPack worth the $600, as I mentioned, or 567 euros as you're seeing here, there is a 10% discount for anyone working in academia. So whether you are a professor or whether you're a student attached to an academic establishment, if you contact sales at Red Pitaya, they will be able to give you a discount on top of this already. And yeah, this is what I was mentioning before. It's what you saw Robin unboxing. It really is everything you need to get started with your own EE lab, but it will fit into one small corner of your desk. It's an incredible box that doesn't just have the Red Pitaya itself in, but every kind of probe or thing that you might want to attach to it, many of which Robin uses through his video on the Red Pitaya itself. So if you would like to find out more about it, please do head to the link in the description. You can find Robin's videos there. There's also links out to the Red Pitaya website where you can get a Red Pitaya, and also they have their own educational stuff on their YouTube channel too, which is definitely worth a look. Not just how to use the Red Pitaya, but everything down to beginner electronics as well. So I will not waffle any further on here about how I think the Red Pitaya is fantastic. I will let Robin do that. He is the engineer in the house after all. But we did start that prize giving before Christmas, and it is time to announce that winner. Oh wait, we did already announce the winner on social media, but in terms of the show, if you're only seeing it just now, let's get that announced. And the winner is Nick Electrock, who said, "I'm currently studying photonics and photonic integrated circuits." That sounds very interesting. I have no idea what that is. Okay, my quick Google foo makes me think this is the coolest thing I've ever heard. Like, this is making ICs using light, and waveguides are now resistors, and you can make transistors with lasers instead. Okay, I'm going to spend the rest of the day reading about this. I'm currently studying photonics and photonic integrated circuits. We're working on a project to develop an electro-optical VNA. The Red Pitaya would greatly help me move forward with this project and overall with my education. It would also be incredibly useful as a hobbyist for electronics and SDR enthusiast. And yes, all of these things are true. I'm very, very glad that this Red Pitaya is going to find a home where it's going to be used for a variety of different stuff. Photonic integrated circuits sounds absolutely fascinating. I'd love to chat to you about that at some point, but for now, Nick Electrock, congratulations. You are the winner. We'll be getting in touch with you as to how we can get the Red Pitaya EduPack out to you. And to those of you that did not win, I would highly recommend taking a look at the Electromaker Educator video and taking a look at the Red Pitaya website. Because while Red Pitaya worked with us on this giveaway, one of the reasons that I have felt so compelled to talk about them for quite a while is that even as a non-engineer, I've collected various bits of equipment over the years, some of which are good, some of which are not so good. But even with, for example, my oscilloscope was super cheap secondhand and is ancient, and my logic analyzer isn't a particularly expensive one, but when you add up all of the things that I've got over the years that are for different kinds of function generation and reading stuff, it still hits a pretty high price peak of the hill. Whereas a Red Pitaya is not only a single thing that you can use to do all of those tasks, it is small enough to fit in a corner of your desk. Yeah, my oscilloscope is basically a desk. So if you would like to find out more, as always, links in the description. Now, the Arduino Pro line is Arduino's professional grade line of development boards. And while they have blurred the lines between the two of them, for example, on the regular Arduino side, you have the Giga, which is an incredibly powerful board that can be used for a lot of real-life industrial stuff. And the Portenta C33 or some of the Nikola boards are cheap enough and easy enough to use that they definitely fit more in the hobby side of things. There is still sort of that distinction to an extent. Because if you get a regular Arduino board, you have a bunch of different shields that will attach to it, or a bunch of different ways you can work with it that are pretty easy to just get going with. Admittedly, some of the nano boards need a little bit of help, but for the most part, you can plug something in and get going straight off the bat. Whereas the Pro lines haven't necessarily been that easy to prototype until now. So the Arduino Portenta Proto Kit ME, which stands for Motion Environment, is something that they just released. I believe it was announced at CES, but as always, there's a fantastic CNX software article about it, and I highly recommend you go and read that after I've talked about it here, because it will go through all of the details. But essentially, they've taken everything that makes the Portenta line great and stuffed it into one amazing kit. Now, straight off the bat, let's just say this kit costs a bit. It's going to be around $400, but it does combine pretty much everything good about the Portenta line. So It contains a Portenta H7, which is the middle board from the top of the Pro line. The only board above it is the X8, which is their insane mixture of MCU and Linux computer, and the one below it is the Portenta C33. But the H7 is their STM32 based does everything very well board, but this time it comes with a carrier, which is the middle-sized carrier. It also comes with the Nikola Sense ME board, which is where the motion capture stuff comes in, which is designed to fit perfectly into the board. You get a full set of Modulino nodes. Now, Modulinos are the things that were introduced with the Arduino IoT pegboard kit. I may have forgotten the name of that one, but that comes with an Arduino Uno. It allows you to put them all on a pegboard and connect everything in. It is the equivalent of their Stemmer QT or Quick connectors, little modules that you can attach to it. You get a full set of those with this Portenta kit, allowing you to use various different forms of sensors and things that will plug in directly without needing to do any soldering. And you also get a subscription to the business version of Arduino Cloud. So when you put all of those things together, what does it give you? Well, flexibility. If you are someone who's working as an engineer, it doesn't necessarily mean you want to grab out the soldering iron or make a custom PCB every time you want to prototype something. Arduino have come together in a way that allows you to use pretty much a good bit of every part of their Pro line to come up with most things that you might want to do in an industrial environment. While this is very much focusing on the motion side of things, there's not much you couldn't necessarily do by plugging in these Modulinos, because bear in mind that these are all cross-compatible. You have a Stemmer/QT cross-compatibility thing going on there, which makes them very, very useful for working without having to do any soldering or any kind of PCB design just to get something off the ground. So as previously mentioned, you're looking at around $400. I believe it's $380, 430 euros for the ME kit. A couple of things worth mentioning as well is the ME kit is just the first of these Portenta Pro kits that are coming out. They're going to put the Vision version out as well, which I'm presuming is going to be very similar, but with the Nikola Vision board on it instead of the Motion board on it instead. And there's going to be presumably also the environmental sensing board as well, although that one will work slightly differently just by virtue of the fact that the environmental board is the only Nikola board that doesn't have its own host MCU in that's programmable. Now, if you are already working in the industry, I understand that there might be a sort of question mark over whether this would have any use for you if you're going to be working with Arduino code while prototyping and then putting your own production code out at the end of the day. But one of the beauties of this is that you can use this as a general purpose development platform and then swap out different parts as and when. Because at the end of the day, if you take the Portenta H7 out of the baseboard and then you create your own baseboard design specifically for the consumer item or industrial item that you're making, as long as you've used all the same ports, you can just plug that in. As for the code side of things, obviously that's a little bit different, but if you have different code needs from the very get-go, then you're not going to be prototyping with Arduino gear, I think. I think I said that right. I may have said that wrong. If I have, please let me know in the comments how I haven't said that correctly, and I'll try and say it clearer when I come back to this when the Vision kit comes out. That has been the show for this week. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for bearing with me in this weird transition from doing shows in the Attic of Dreams to doing them on location. It is incredibly hot in this room. I had to keep all the windows closed so that the street noise didn't come in. And I know I tripped over a few words here and there because of that. Thank you for your patience. This is going to be a very interesting experiment doing the Electromaker show out on the road. It's going to be exactly the same as it always has been. The difference being is instead of having the Attic of Dreams behind me, you're probably going to have a lot of quite nice wilderness environments in the background coming up in the next little while by virtue of the fact that me and my family are out of the country for the next couple of months. But that doesn't really change anything in terms of Electromaker. I will still be keeping my eye on the best maker news and products and crowdfunding campaign stuff, some of which I already have penciled in for next week's show. And until then, thank you all so much for your support. If you want to support us further, head to electromaker.io/shop. But for now, I hope you have a fun, safe, and creative week, and I will chat to you soon.